Have you ever wanted to launch a Patreon page, but you wish that you just knew a little bit more about it before you finalized that decision? If so, this video might be helpful to you. Hello, my name is Mei Yang. I am a digital illustrator. I've had a Patreon page for a year now and I've learned so many things. I'm going to share some of the behind the scenes of using Patreon, what you can do as a creator, and some other information that I think would be useful to you if you decide to have a Patreon in the future. One of the first things you're going to encounter when you decide to launch a Patreon page is deciding which plan you want to use. Patreon offers 3 different plans and they take a certain percentage from each, plus there are other fees and taxes that are applied on top of that. The first one is the Pro plan where they take 8%. Then there's the Pro plus merch where they take 11%. And then there's the Premium plan where they take 12%. If you're an artist like me and you draw your own designs, you hand make them or you outsource them and you ship them yourself, then the Pro plan has everything you need to be successful on Patreon. If you want to pay the extra 3% for a total of 11%, Patreon can help you create merch for your tiers. And I'll talk about that later on in the video. The Premium plan has everything the Pro plan has, in addition to having a dedicated partner manager and the ability to add team members. I don't know what a dedicated partner manager is because, to tell you the truth, I didn't look into it further. But with team members, there's a section within your Patreon page where you can add members into that section, and those people can help you manage and organize and schedule and post things on your Patreon without having to have access to your own personal account. So that's really good for you if you're a bigger content creator who has a huge team, or you're just a team of more than just one person. In the future, if you find that the plan that you chose at the start isn't working out for you, you can always change it. So now let's talk about processing fees and rates. The prices of your tiers matter because depending on how much they are, they will be under 2 different type of rates. One is called the micropayment rate and the other is the standard rate. The micropayment rate is for anything that's under $3, and then the standard rate is for anything over $3. It's required by law that Patreon takes sales tax and VAT. It is normal, so that's not surprising. Patreon will submit that for you, so you don't have to do it yourself, which is really nice. There will be currency conversion fees, which is 2.5%. After all that has been figured out, whatever you receive in your payout tab is the money that you are going to get after all the deductions have been made. Let's go back to tier prices. It's really important to note that the currency that you're getting paid in matters a lot. The amount total you pay for the micropayment rate and the standard rate will depend on the currency that you're paying in. If you get paid in USD, there's quite a few things that matter. The person who's signing up for your Patreon, are they international or do they live in the US? How is that person paying? Are they paying with a credit card, PayPal, Venmo, Apple Pay? All of that matters, and depending what the end result is the total that you're going to pay. If you're outside of the US and you're in a country where Patreon is available, you would be paying different rates depending on what your currency is. I am a Canadian creator, so I'm paying a micropayment rate of 5% and 10 cents Canadian and a standard rate of 3.2% and 35 cents. As an example, I'll share with you what I've made along with what my fees were for the month of July. The amount charged was $116.58. In total, I got $73.79. The processing fees were $5.56. The Patreon fee was $7.12. There was $27.98 that was declined, and later on I did receive that because my patrons did decide to update their payment information, so that went through whenever they decided to do that. And then there was a currency conversion fee that was $2.13. When it comes to percentages, the creator's share was 83.28%. The processing fee was 6.28%. The Patreon fee was 8.04%. and the currency conversion fee was 2.4%. How does a creator get paid? Patreon will charge your members the first of every month. If someone signs up after the first, they will be charged whenever they signed up, and then they will be also charged on the first of the next month. And if you have auto withdrawal on, it will do that every 5th of the month. You could turn the auto withdrawal off if you want to. You could also withdraw funds every 24 hours. Eventually you get an option that will allow you to charge patrons the day that they sign up instead of every first of the month. I received the option to do this after having my Patreon page for a couple of months already. It's really important to know that if you decide to go with this type of payment method, then you won't be able to go back on it. If you're getting paid in USD, you have the option to do direct deposit. And every time you pay out using that method, it'll be 25 cents. If you are in the US Virgin Islands or any other US territory or possession except for Puerto Rico, this option will not be available to you. You have another option, which is PayPal. They take 1% of the income that you are receiving. You must have a minimum of $10. If you are getting paid in another currency, your only option is getting paid through PayPal. The payout fee will differ from country to country. As a Canadian creator, I pay $1 every time that the money is sent to my PayPal account. With all of this, we also have to talk about taxes. If you receive $600 or more within a year, you will receive a tax document that will be available to you the next year, and you will need to use that for filing your taxes. For me, that document for this year will be available for me February 1st of next year. If you're ever curious about any of this processing fee, rates, tax stuff, and so on, you always have access to downloading the CSVs for it. If you don't know what a CSV is, it's a document that you can open using Excel, or if you don't have that, you can use Google Sheets as well. It will give you very detailed information of all these rates and fees that we just talked about. Now let's talk about Patreon rewards. I've been asked multiple times, what kind of rewards can you offer? When do I need to send rewards? How do you figure out the theme of the month? How do you know what to even offer as reward? And so on. The first thing that I would suggest is, what are you already doing that you know that you can offer to your patrons? For me as an artist, some of the things I already create are prints, stickers, stationery goodies like notepads, memo pads, letter sheets. So those are the types of words that I'm already comfortable offering. If you're still not sure of what else you can offer, why not check out some of your favorite creators that are doing similar things to you? What are they offering, and do you see that you can offer those things yourself? Some of the things that I've seen that have been offered as rewards are sketchbook tours, book clubs, Zoom calls where everyone gets together, they either work together or they watch a movie together, tutorials, brush packs, goodie boxes, original artwork, and there's so many other possibilities. It's really important when you think about each tier that you're going to create that you consider everything that you're offering. When I was at the very young stages of trying to figure that stuff out myself, I had a really hard time justifying $10 for a single die cut sticker. But then I also had to remember everything else that came with the tier. It's not like someone is going to my Etsy shop, buying a die cut sticker, and then that's it. The person who is in this tier also receives digital downloads. They get my exclusive podcasts that I only do for Patreon. They also receive a monthly discount code to my Etsy shop. And they're also the first to hear about any announcements and see any of the behind the scenes of the stuff I do for my small business. In the end, to me, $10 sounded perfectly fine. Another thing that you have to consider when you're thinking about the prices of your tiers, if it's a physical tier, how much does it cost to ship the goodies? How much does it cost for a stamp for where you live and internationally? How much is the total weight of everything that you're going to send for each tier? And if you have a goodie box, what is the weight of all those goodies that are going to be there? Because all that matters when it comes to the total shipping price. That's why you will see a lot of Patreon pages that have an international Patreon tier and then a standard tier for those who live in the same country as the creator. Make sure you don't overdo it. Do not do too much when you're starting off, especially if you're a small creator like me. Really think about what you can handle. Think about your mental and physical health. If you have a small business, make sure you do not pack your Patreon so much that you will no longer have time for your small business. Consider how long it takes you to create your goodies. There are artists out there who can create their goodies in a day, and that is amazing. However, that artist is not me. It's always better to add a tier than to get rid of a tier. If you have a tier where you're sending some amazing goodies every month and you have people who are super excited to receive it, and then in the end you find that it's too much for you, or you can't handle creating all the goodies for them, or if you're having trouble with manufacturing the goods, your patrons will be disappointed. So it's always better to start small and then add as you get more patrons and feel more comfortable. When it comes to how to schedule your Patreon every month, every creator's schedule is different from the other. And again, just do what you think you can do within a month without it taking over your life. It's also very important that you share your schedule with your patrons every month, and a lot of artists do this by creating a monthly calendar. The first few months is going to be kind of off for you while you're still trying to navigate what the perfect schedule is for you. When I started, I thought that I can't handle doing 2 podcasts a month, and I did that for a couple months, and then I realized that I could not handle that. So I took it out, and it's totally fine if you take something like that out. I don't think your patrons will mind. But because how long it takes me to create art and also thinking about a small business, I knew that I had to take it out. So don't be afraid to do that if you need to. When it comes to sending out your happy mail, you can send it whenever you want to. I've seen creators send it in the middle of the month, the end of the month, the first of the next month. So just do what works for you. For me, I like to pack Patreon rewards sometime during the last 2 weeks of the month. When it comes to seasonal goodies though, like Halloween and winter, I like to try my best to send it in the middle of the month before the holiday. That way my patrons can receive it the month of the holiday and they can utilize it. If you find that a couple months you're having a hard time sticking to your normal schedule, it is totally fine. All you have to do is tell your patrons that there will be a delay with announcing rewards or sending rewards out. They're not going to be mad at you. You have to remember that your patrons really love what you do. They've taken the extra mile to become your patron. If at any time you feel like it's a bit too overwhelming and you need a break from it, you can pause a billing cycle. That means that for a certain month, your patrons won't get billed. They'll still have access to your Patreon page, but just let them know beforehand if you're planning to take a break. That way they don't expect to see content from you for that certain month. How long do you have to decide the theme? There are some creators who really like to work ahead, and there's some who have to work ahead because maybe they do an enamel pen club or they do a goodie box every month and they outsource their goodies. So it makes sense that those creators would choose the theme themselves every month. And then there are some creators who are like me. At the end of the month, usually a week or 2 before the end of the month, I will have a poll with 2 or 3 options that my patrons can choose from. I'll wait a day or 2, and then whatever the final result is the theme that will be chosen. Now let's talk about merch for membership. It is a service offered by Patreon to help creators create merch for certain tiers that they have available. Patreon will have templates available for many different type of items such as mini prints, stickers, mugs, tote bags, long sleeve shirts, t-shirts, hoodies, and more. Once you decide which one of those items you're going to create, Patreon will help you decide which tier will fit the best for whichever piece of merch that you're making. And all of this is figured out by figuring out all the fees that we talked about earlier and the cost of production and shipping. After that is done, it is your job to promote that item in your tier. Hopefully you will have people who will be interested and would join that certain tier. All you have to do is design the goodie, and Patreon will take care of everything else. They will take care of the production, the shipping, which comes with tracking and is worldwide, and they also deal with customer service if something happens. You'll receive a digital preview of the item that you're creating, but if you do want a physical version before it gets shipped out to your patrons, they have an email that they provide that you can write to. It's very important to note that this doesn't get sent out every month. For someone to qualify to receive that merch, they have to be in that tier for 3 months straight with successful payments. If they decide to downgrade their tier before the end of the 3 months, they will not receive the merch. If you have patrons that were already in that tier before you decided to do the merch, the previous months do not count. So the patrons will have to stay an additional 3 months before they qualify. Once they do though, they will receive an email telling them that they will be receiving the goodie. Let's talk a little bit about posting it on Patreon. There are several different options you could choose from when you decide to post on Patreon, and they're pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go over every single little thing, but I'll share a few things about some of them that might be helpful for you. For the majority of the type of posts that you can create, you can attach PDFs, PNGs, JPEGs, and that works great if you're someone who's going to be offering digital downloads. Once that is done, you have the option to either make your post public for patrons only or for select tiers. Something that's very important that I see that some newer creators overlook is the text preview. Everyone is going to see whatever is in the text preview, and normally if you don't edit it, it's literally a whole paragraph. So if you're someone who is going to be offering something like a discount code for a select tier, make sure you edit that to something else so it doesn't show that coupon code for every single person who comes to take a look at your page. You can upload videos on Patreon for now. It is in early access for 2023. Right now I have 500 hours that I can use to upload onto Patreon, and if you're someone who ends up using that a whole lot and you have 10 hours or less, you can request more for free. Once 2024 rolls around though, there's going to be a pricing plan for it. If you have created videos prior to 2024, everything that you had will still be accessible for future patrons. If you want to keep posting videos though, there's a bit of a workaround with it. You have the ability to post links on Patreon, so you can create an unlisted video on YouTube, put the link into that type of post, and then your patrons will be redirected to the YouTube video instead. For the videos that are on Patreon, you can do previews for them that the public can see. It can last from 10 seconds to 2 minutes, but your video has to be at least 2 minutes to have access to the preview. You can also upload audio files directly onto Patreon, so if you do podcasts, that is great for you. Like the video, you can do an audio preview, and this could be 30 seconds to 5 minutes long, and you can choose which section of the podcast you want to be the preview. You can always disable this though if you don't want there to be one. Now let's talk about some things that I found after having a Patreon for a year. The first time that this happened, I was really confused. If you have a member who is in a tier that receives physical goodie, you will see their address, which makes sense because you have to send them stuff. If they are not, you will not have access to seeing their address. If someone goes from being in a tier that receives Happy Mail and they drop to a tier that doesn't, you will no longer see their address, but then that person can still see all the posts for the month from the tier that they were in previously. So I wasn't sure if I needed to send this person Happy Mail or not, because even though I didn't have access to their address anymore, they could see the coupon code, anything that had to do with that certain tier only. And this is after the payment for the first of the month already went through. When it got closer to the end of the month, I just went ahead and asked that person for their shipping address, and I shipped the goodie to them anyway. After that, I decided that if I don't see someone's shipping address, then I'm not going to ship it out. I only notice these kind of things because I have a smaller amount of patrons, so it's easier to notice and manage. But if Eventually, my Patreon grows, it'll be harder to notice. If someone joins a Happy Meal tier in the middle of the month and then they cancel their pledge for the next month, you have access to their address until that person's access to your Patreon has ended. And the access ends on the 1st of the next month. It'll be midnight if you are on the West Coast, and if you're on the East Coast, it is at 3 a.m. Sometimes payment declines are going to happen. It is normal. Maybe someone forgot to update their payment options. What Patreon would do when that happens is they would send 6 emails throughout the entire month just to remind the patron that, hey, you should update your payment option if you want to continue being a patron. And if they do that, you will receive the funds later. There's a tab that you can find on your Patreon page called Benefits. Now, I haven't used this, but I've looked into it a little bit to see what it is. And what the Benefits tab is supposed to do is help you track rewards for each different thing that you have available. When you create your tiers, Patreon allows you to kind of add some kind of tag to each thing, and those tags could be physical goodies, digital goodies, early access, full library access, and so on. You'll have access to those tags, and then you can press add tracking. If the patron are in the tiers that correlate with those tags, you get a list of the patrons, and it's supposed to help you make sure that each of them receives their rewards. So for example, let's say it's at the end of the month, I want to pack physical goodies. I can click on the add tracking for physical goodies. I'll get a list of my patrons, and as I pack patron rewards, and after I write their address and everything, I can check mark each patron as I go to make sure that everyone gets accounted for. This is really useful if you want to keep everything that has to do with Patreon in Patreon. But I've also heard a lot of people use Excel to stay organized, so you can do that if you want to. When someone decides to leave, they do an exit survey. Patreon allows them to vaguely tell you why they left. So some of the options are they got what they wanted from your Patreon page, they gave you the amount that they wanted to give you, the financial situation has changed, or the patron has the option to not say anything at all. They also have the option to leave you feedback if they want to. Now let's move on to the Q&A. Why did you start Patreon, and any advice that you can give for those who want to start one? I would give you advice as a smaller creator. Unless your community is asking for it, you will never really know for sure. So you have to go into creating a Patreon knowing that it might not be successful. You have to mentally prepare yourself to get 0 or very few patrons. It could be great and you can get a lot of patrons, but the thing is, you have to prepare yourself for each different thing that can happen. Before I launched my page, I did take some things into consideration. I did launch it because I just wanted to see where it went. I know that's not the best answer. You can only decide from how your community is reacting to the things that you do. Are they excited when you do a shop update, when you upload a studio vlog, when you create a new product? Do you see that you are having some kind of interaction with your community, and your community is visibly showing you some interest? This doesn't mean that people who don't interact with you as much are not interested, but then as a smaller creator, we can only take cues from the things that we can see. And if you see that there's enough evidence for you to start a Patreon page, go for it. The worst thing that could happen is that it isn't as successful as you would like. You can unpublish your Patreon page and try again another time. Although it's great to have a whole lot of followers, that doesn't matter if you don't have some kind of relationship or interaction with them. You can't just post something and then expect to get all the love in the world with no other extra effort. It takes efforts from both sides to create a community, keep people interested. It's not easy work. Do you think it would be worth it for you if you only get 1, 2, 3, 4 patrons? It takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and if you don't have all of that to give to 4 or 5 patrons, then don't do it yet. Wait a little while longer, try to build your community, and once you see that stuff is happening between you and people who follow you, that's when you can try to launch it and see how it goes. 2 questions, but I'm going to put it into one. What do you like the most about using Patreon, and what is your least favorite part of running your Patreon? What I like the most about Patreon is the challenge that it gives me. If I didn't have a Patreon, I honestly would not create as much art as I am now. Actual illustrations. And it's funny because I see I'm a digital illustrator, but if I was just making artwork to sell my Etsy shop, I would be just drawing smaller designs like die-cut sticker designs. But when it comes to my artwork, it's been really nice to see how much my artwork has improved. My rendering process has changed. I've seen the improvement of my color choices, how I decide to color things and draw things, figuring out how to draw my characters, which is kind of funny because when I used to draw Captain Froggo, although he's just mostly a bunch of ovals or circles, he was really hard for me to draw. And I hate to admit that, but it is true. Now, the least part I like about Patreon is the exact same thing. The challenge is physically, mentally, creatively challenging. Some of the hardest things for me is to actually figure out the theme for each month. Sometimes when I'm typing like the post for the poll, I don't even have an idea for a theme till I'm actually deciding it right then and there. Thankfully, I have this talent, because if I didn't, I would be in a lot of trouble. Now, it's not serious when I say in a lot of trouble, but as a creator, you want to be prepared for these kind of things. What percent of income from Patreon is left after covering fees and manufacturing and mailing costs? I already covered the fees and also already shared my income for July. When it comes to production of your stuff, there's too many things to factor to figure out the final price, because there's a very high possibility that every month is going to be different. It's never going to be the same. It depends on what you create, what the cost of your own products is, because what it costs you to make something is going to be different from what it costs me to make something, because it depends on if you handmade them or you get them manufactured. How many of your patrons are actually receiving Happy Meal, and how many of those patrons live where you live, and how many of them are international? How much do your stamps cost you to ship where you live and to ship international as well? And what are you creating for that month? Are you creating the same thing every month? Are you creating things that are a little different every month? When I do my Pinnacle Club goodies, which is my highest tier of Patreon, I do stationery goodies like memo sheets, memo pads, notepads, letter sets, letter sheets, and so on. So the price of that can always change. For me to ship that internationally to the USA, that could cost me $1.94 to $3.21 depending on the weight. That doesn't include the cost of the envelope and all the packaging that I use for it. That doesn't include the time and the effort I put into the artwork, into doing everything else that I already offer. I am putting in a lot more time and effort into it than what I am receiving back. And the reason why I continue to do Patreon regardless of that fact is I actually really enjoy doing it. Luckily enough, I am in a position where I don't have to be profiting right off the bat of my small business and Patreon. So you really have to consider all the stuff before you think about launching your page. What are the recommended things to do or research before you start one? I already recommended a few things, but if after hearing all that you're still not too sure, you can always join your favorite creators Patreon for a month. That's what I did before I started my Patreon page. I joined Apinus Illustrator's Patreon for a month to see how she was running hers. I am very thankful for Apinus Illustrator because when I started, I was so lost, and I knew that Apinus Illustrator was the only person that I felt comfortable enough to approach, to talk to, and ask questions. And she was very, very helpful. Forever thankful for her. Also, it's really important to figure out the shipping costs for where you live, and the shipping cost is for international. Things like goodie boxes require customs form, so it's important that you figure out how to fill that out if that's something you're interested in doing. And it's super important that when you finally decide that it's time to launch your Patreon, that the month before you advertise it on your social media. The way I've seen creators do this is by posting what their tiers are going to be. If you have 4 or 5 tiers, you can make a post about it once every week. What I did was I kind of made my posts look like a newspaper article for Pandi Village, which is the place where my original characters live. And every Monday I made a post sharing information about a tier that I had. And then the last week I shared 2 because I had a total of 5 tiers. It's also just a little reminder to your followers that it is happening. I feel like this part is really important. This is similar to when you create a new product or creating new artwork. You're going to share that with your community so they know to expect it sometime in the future. I feel like that's a much better way to do it than just launching it out of nowhere. The only way that that will work, where you just launch it out of nowhere and then announce it, is if your community is already asking for it. If they're not, you have to do some extra work to make sure that your Patreon is as successful as possible. I hope that you're a bit more comfortable with launching a Patreon page in the future. If you have any questions, put them in the comments down below and I'll try to answer them if I can. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye! I've been wanting to do Patreon for a while now, but then I've been scared to because my following is really small. And when you watch all these other Patreon videos of others who have done it, they usually say to wait until you have a bigger following. But someone I spoke to is Patrice from A Penance Illustrator, and she's been a really amazing person. She's been answering my questions and she's been helping me out, and I really appreciate it. She's an amazing person. If I had the funds, I would definitely support Patrice because she does so much for her patrons. And even if you're not a patron, she does so much for her YouTube channel, and it's all free, and she's just an amazing person overall. So thank you so much, Patrice. I really appreciate your help. When Patrice started, she was thinking she wasn't gonna get any patrons, and she had under 500 subscribers. I don't remember how many Instagram followers she had, probably more than I do, because I've been kind of stuck a little bit on Instagram. Recently I started to grow a little bit, which is really nice. It makes me really happy. I talked to her a little bit and she said you just go ahead and go for it if I'm thinking about doing it, because she said that it's better to start a Patreon when you're smaller and get a few patrons than wait till you're bigger to get a lot more patrons, because at least you can get used to having the patron even if you only have a few of them. It makes me feel a little better. I'm excited because I have a lot of ideas, but I'm also really scared because, like I said, I don't really have that big of a following, and it's just scared to think about doing all this and then it fails. One of the things I already put money into for the Patreon is a membership card. Now, a lot of people don't do membership cards till later on in their Patreon journey. Like G Soupy did one, but she did it later, along with Chrissy Art Cafe. She did the same thing. I think even Paloma, she's gonna do one once she hits a certain goal on her Patreon, because I've been looking at a lot of illustrators patrons to get an idea what they're doing and see if I can offer something similar. I know it's gonna be a lot of work, but I think it's definitely gonna be worth it, especially if it ends up going well.